I never thought I'd be the one sitting here, telling a story that sounds like a twisted plot from a prestige TV drama. But life has a funny way of throwing you into the deep end when you least expect it. My 78-year-old grandmother, a woman I've looked up to my entire life, my business partner, the rock of our family, looked my husband dead in the eye the other day and said four words I never in a million years expected to hear from her. She leaned in, a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in a decade, and whispered, I'm gonna get laid. Now, you might be thinking, good for her, or maybe you're laughing. But before you judge or cheer, you need to understand the house of cards we've been living in. You need to understand the smell of antiseptic and fading memories that fills my grandparents' home, and the shadow of a man who is still physically there, but whose soul left the building years ago. Because this isn't just a story about an elderly woman finding a second wind. It's a story about a decades-long marriage, a brutal disease called dementia, and the moment a woman decided she couldn't wait for a funeral to start living again. It's about a secret she's been keeping in parking lots and deleted text messages, and the black tie gala that's about to become ground zero for a family explosion. To really understand how we got to that driveway conversation, I have to take you back a bit. My grandmother, let's call her Kate, isn't your typical bake cookies and knit sweaters kind of grandma. She's sharp. She's a powerhouse. We actually own and run a business together, which means I spend more time with her than almost anyone else in my life. We're a team. But for the last 10 years, Kate has been living a double life. By day, she's a professional, a mentor, and a leader. By night, she's a full-time caregiver to my grandfather. My grandpa has had dementia for about a decade now. And I'm going to be brutally honest with you. He has always been an asshole. I know you're supposed to speak kindly of the elderly and the sick, but dementia doesn't just take your memories. It strips away your filters. If you were a kind person, maybe you become a confused, gentle soul. But if you were already difficult, it turns the volume up to 11. As his brain has physically shrunk, his personality has sharpened into something jagged and cruel. The last 6 months have been a descent into a special kind of hell. His decline hasn't been a slope, it's been a cliff. He's mean, he's demanding, and he's increasingly volatile. I know this firsthand because back in August, I had to step in and take care of him for a full month while Kate was occupied. That month broke me. I went into it thinking I was strong, thinking I could handle the old man tantrums. But by the end of those 30 days, I was so deeply depressed, I had to go back to therapy. The way he spoke to me, the way he looked through me, it was like being trapped in a cage with a ghost that still knew exactly how to hurt you. So I've seen the toll it's taken on Kate. I've watched her age 20 years in the last 5. I've seen her shoulders slump under the weight of a man who doesn't remember her name, but remembers every way to make her feel small. We've been telling her for years, Kate, you need to take time for yourself. You're drowning. But she always refused. She's old school. She took those in sickness and in health vows seriously, even when the person she was caring for was no longer the man she married. Then, a few months ago, something shifted. It started small. Kate began going to the gym every single morning. This was a woman who, for years, considered walking from the car to the office her cardio. Suddenly, she's up at the crack of dawn hitting the treadmill. Then came the makeup. She started wearing foundation, mascara, a little bit of lip color, not just for big meetings, but every day. She started buying new clothes, things that actually fit her well and made her look, well, vibrant. My husband and I started noticing the little things. She was in a better mood at the office. She was laughing more. But there was a flip side. She seemed significantly more bothered by my grandpa's behavior. It was like she was finally noticing how toxic the environment at home was because she finally had something to compare it to. And then there were the texts. Kate started deleting her text messages the second she read them. Now, we had actually talked about her doing this for work, to keep her inbox clean and stay on top of client replies. But the timing was suspicious. She wasn't just deleting work emails, she was guarding that phone like it held the secrets to the universe. I remember sitting on the couch with my husband one night, and he looked at me and said, "You think your grandma is seeing someone?" I laughed it off at first. "She's 78, honey. She's caring for a man with late-stage dementia. When will she even have the time?" But the seed was planted. I brought it up to my mom, thinking she'd have some insight. I laid out all the evidence. The gym, the clothes, the phone, the sudden burst of joy. My mom just shook her head. "Kate isn't cheating," she said firmly. "She's just finally listening to us. She's taking time for herself. Let her have this, okay? She's earned some happiness." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to think that my grandmother had just found a new lease on life through self-care and exercise. But then there was the client. His name was Mike. Mike is 62, so he's significantly younger than Kate. He was originally my client, but he was a lot. He was high maintenance, required a ton of hand-holding, and honestly, I just didn't have the bandwidth for him. So I passed him off to Kate. At the time, I thought I was doing her a favor by giving her a project to focus on. I didn't realize I was handing her a match and a can of gasoline. The suspicion stayed in the back of my mind, a low-grade hum, until we got the invitation to the black tie gala. This was a huge event for our industry. Everyone who's anyone was going to be there. Kate called my mom and asked if she would stay with my grandpa for the evening so she could attend with me, my husband, and two of our other employees. It seemed like a standard business outing. But then, the story started to leak. Kate didn't tell my mom the whole truth. She didn't mention that she had already invited a date. And she didn't mention that her date was Mike. She only told me because she knew I'd be there, and there was no way she could hide it once we were all in the same room. But even the way she told me was calculated. She told two other employees first, almost like she was testing the waters to see if they'd judge her. The original plan, the official version of events, was that she was going to bring my grandpa. Can you imagine? Bringing a man with advanced dementia to a black tie gala? It would have been a disaster. Then the plan shifted. Mike would come as the date of one of our other employees. But Mike put his foot down. He told Kate he wasn't going to come if my grandpa was there, and he didn't want to play pretend with another woman. So Kate did the unthinkable. She uninvited her husband. She told my mom she needed a night off and left my grandpa at home while she prepared to step out on the town with a man 16 years her junior. When she finally sat me down to confess, she was practically in tears. This powerful, confident woman was trembling, begging me not to think less of her. She told me that if I was uncomfortable, or if my husband was uncomfortable, she would cancel the whole thing. She would go alone. She would go back to being the dutiful, miserable wife. I looked at her, And I didn't see a cheater. I saw a woman who had been starving for affection, for conversation, for someone to look at her and see Kate, not just the caregiver. I started asking probing questions because, let's be honest, I already knew. I even knew it was Mike. I asked her how far it had gone. She swore to me that nothing physical had happened yet. It was all flirting, long phone calls, and the occasional secret meeting. They would meet for lunch or just sit in their cars in a parking lot talking for hours. She described it like they were teenagers, vibrant and nervous and full of that new love energy. It was innocent, but it was also deeply intimate in a way her marriage hadn't been in years. I told her it was okay. I told her I wanted her to be happy, and I meant it. But as I said those words, I felt a strange tightening in my chest. I knew the world they were about to walk into at that gala. I knew that people would talk, and I knew that back at the house, my grandpa was sitting in his chair, losing more of himself every hour, completely unaware that his wife was planning her exit, or at least her temporary escape. Kate spent the rest of that afternoon talking about Mike. Her face was transformed. She had this permanent smile, this glow that you only see on people who are truly deeply smitten. It was beautiful, and it was heartbreaking. But then, the teenager phase ended, and the reality of the situation came crashing back. My husband arrived to pick me up for a weekend getaway we had planned before the gala. I told Kate I'd handle telling him the news about Mike so she wouldn't have to face his reaction. We were all standing in the driveway, just a quick, casual goodbye. My husband, being the friendly guy he is, asked her if she was excited for the gala. He meant the food, the networking, the chance to dress up. And that's when she said it. That's when she blurted out with a mixture of defiance and giddiness. I'm gonna get laid. My husband's face. I wish I had a photo of it. It was the face of a man who had just watched his reality glitch. Or our speculations, or our maybe she is, maybe she isn't conversations. It was all confirmed in the most blunt, shocking way possible. As we drove away, leaving her standing there in the driveway, the silence in the car was heavy. Finally, my husband spoke up. If she's going to move on, he said, she needs to put your grandpa in a home. She can't have it both ways. She can't be sneaking around and getting laid while he's rotting in the other room. It's not right. I didn't know what to say because he was right. But she was also right. And in the middle of it all was a man who didn't even know what room he was in. The silence in the car after we pulled out of that driveway was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. My husband Mark kept his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to process what my 78-year-old grandmother had just announced with the glee of a college student on spring break. Did she really just say that? He finally asked, his voice low and tight. In the middle of the driveway? In broad daylight? She did, I whispered, leaning my head against the cool glass of the passenger window. She really did. For the next hour of our drive, the weekend getaway we had planned felt less like a vacation and more like a debriefing session in a war room. Mark has always been the more practical one, the one who sees things in black and white. To him, marriage is a fortress. You stay inside until the very end, no matter how battered the walls get. But I've been in the trenches with Kate. I've seen the way her light has been slowly extinguished over the last decade. It's the sneaking around that gets me, Mark said, glancing at me. If she's done, she's done. I get it. Your grandpa, he's not the man he was. He's mean, he's difficult, but he's still her husband. If she wants to move on with this Mike guy, she needs to be honest. She needs to put your grandpa in a professional facility where he can get the care he needs and she can live her life. But doing both? Bringing a date to a business gala while your husband is sitting at home with a sitter because his brain is failing. That's cold, honey. That's real cold. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to tell him he didn't understand the level of guilt Kate carried. In her mind, putting him in a home would be the ultimate betrayal. She'd promised to take care of him until the end. But in her heart, she was already gone. She was starving, and Mike was the first person to offer her a meal in 10 years. To understand why I wasn't as horrified as Mark, you have to understand what happened back in August. Kate had to go away for a few weeks, ironically to handle some business stuff, and I volunteered to stay with my grandpa. I thought I could handle it. I'm 28, I'm healthy, and I love my family. I figured it would be a lot of TV, making sure he took his meds, and maybe dealing with some repetitive questions. I was so wrong. Living with someone whose brain is literally shrinking is like living in a psychological thriller. My grandpa didn't just forget who I was. He invented a version of me that was his enemy. He would follow me from room to room, his face twisted in a sneer I'd never seen when I was a kid. He'd tell me I was useless. He'd tell me I was stealing from him. One afternoon, I spent 3 hours trying to get him to eat a piece of toast, and he spent those 3 hours describing in vivid and cruel detail why I would never be half the woman my grandmother was. It wasn't just the words. It was the relentless, 24/7 nature of it. There is no off switch. You wake up to the sound of him pacing, and you go to sleep listening to him argue with people who aren't there. By the end of that month, I was a shell of a person. I was crying in the shower, dreading every time he called my name. When I finally handed him back to Kate, I felt a wave of shame, so intense it made me sick. I was escaping, and she was staying. So when Kate started telling me about Mike, part of me felt this weird sense of relief for her. Mike was a client I'd passed off to her months ago. He was 62, recently divorced, and frankly, a bit of a pain in the neck. He wanted constant updates, he wanted to collaborate on every tiny detail, and he had a way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I didn't have the patience for him. I had a business to run and a husband to go home to. But Kate? Kate had all the time in the world for a man who wanted to talk to her. She told me that it started with the business calls. They talk about the project for 10 minutes, and then they talk about life for an hour. Mike would tell her she was brilliant. He'd tell her she had a beautiful laugh. He started noticing things, the way she styled her hair, the sharpness of her insides. He was giving her the one thing my grandpa hadn't given her in a decade: validation. We just talk, she told me during our confession session, her eyes wide and earnest. We meet at the park, or we sit in his SUV in the back of the grocery store parking lot. We just sit there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. I feel like I'm 16 again, sneaking out past curfew. And that was the problem. She was sneaking out. She was a 78-year-old woman with a failing husband, acting like a teenager in the back of an SUV. As Mark and I drove further away from the city, I couldn't stop thinking about the gala. This wasn't just a party. This was our professional community. Everyone there knew Kate. They knew she was married to a man who was unwell. If she showed up with Mike, a man who was clearly not her husband, a man who was clearly much younger, the rumors would spread like wildfire. "What are you going to do?" Mark asked, breaking the silence. "At the gala. Are you going to sit at the same table as them? Are you going to be the beard for your grandmother's affair?" "I don't know," I admitted. "She asked me if I was okay with it. She said she'd cancel if I wasn't. And I told her to go. I told her I wanted her to be happy." "Happy is one thing," Mark said. "But this is messy. It's disrespectful to your grandpa, even if he doesn't know what's happening. And it's risky for the business. What happens if a major client sees them? What happens when your mom finds out the real reason Kate uninvited your grandpa?" That was the biggest landmine. My mom. Kate had told my mom she was uninviting grandpa because the event would be too much for him, which was true. But she neglected to mention that the vacant seat was being filled by her new boyfriend. My mom is a saint, but she's also very protective of her father. If she found out that Kate was using her as a free babysitter so she could go get laid with a client, the fallout would be nuclear. The rest of our weekend was overshadowed by this looming disaster. I tried to relax, but every time I checked my phone, I had a text from Kate. "Just bought the most beautiful navy blue gown. Mike is going to love it. Do you think I should wear the pearls or the diamonds? I haven't felt this alive in years." I was happy for her. I really was. But I was also terrified. I felt like I was watching someone dance on the edge of a cliff, and they were so dazzled by the view that they didn't realize how far the drop was. When we finally got back home, reality hit hard. I went over to Kate's house to drop off some paperwork. The house smelled like stale soup and bleach. My grandpa was sitting in his usual chair, staring at a TV that wasn't turned on. He looked frail. He looked small. Kate was in the kitchen, humming to herself. She looked 30. She was wearing a new blouse. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and she was checking her phone every 30 seconds. The contrast was jarring. It was like two different worlds were existing in the same four walls, and they were about to collide. "He had a bad morning," Kate whispered, nodding toward the living room. "He didn't know where he was. He kept asking for his mother. It was exhausting." She said it with a sigh, but her eyes immediately darted back to her phone screen. A notification had popped up. She smiled, a real, genuine, youthful smile, and started typing back. "Is that him?" I asked quietly. "He's picking me up at 7 on Saturday," she said, her voice full of excitement. "He's renting a town car so we don't have to worry about parking. He's such a gentleman, honey. You're going to love him." I looked at my grandpa, sitting in the dark, and then back at my grandmother, glowing in the light of her smartphone. I realized then that the gala wasn't just a date. It was a debut. She was planning on stepping out of the shadows and into a new life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was vastly underestimating the cost of that entrance fee. The week leading up to the gala felt like a slow-motion car crash. I was the only person in the family who knew the full truth, and the weight of it was starting to crush me. I'd find myself sitting at my desk in the office we shared, watching Kate glide across the room with a literal spring in her step. She was 78, but she looked like she'd found the fountain of youth in a parking lot with a 62-year-old man named Mike. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from her, my heart skipped a beat. Sometimes it was a photo of a pair of shoes she'd bought. Expensive, strappy things that a woman her age shouldn't be wearing according to society's rules. Sometimes it was a screenshot of a text from Mike telling her she was the highlight of his day. I felt like a co-conspirator in a heist, and the vault we were robbing was my grandfather's dignity and my mother's trust. Speaking of my mother, that was the hardest part. A few days before the event, I stopped by the house to find my mom sitting in the kitchen with Kate. They were looking at the schedule for the gala evening. My mom was taking notes, mapping out when she'd arrive to stay with Grandpa, what time his meds were due, and how she'd handle him if he had a sundowning episode. Those terrifying periods in the late afternoon when dementia patients often become agitated and confused. "I'm just so glad you're doing this, Mom," my mother said, patting Kate's hand. "You've been a saint for 10 years. You deserve a night to just be Kate, the business owner, not Kate, the nurse." I stood in the doorway, my throat tight. Kate didn't even flinch. She smiled at her daughter, my mother, and said, "I really do, honey. It's been a long time since I felt like myself." It wasn't a lie, but it was a massive omission. I looked at Kate, trying to catch her eye, trying to see if there was a flicker of guilt. But there was nothing but a calm, steady resolve. It was like she'd already done the moral math in her head and decided that the years of sacrifice she'd put in had earned her this get-out-of-jail-free card. She'd paid her dues in sleepless nights and verbal abuse, and now she was cashing in. When my mom left to go check on Grandpa in the other room, I leaned against the counter. "You're really not going to tell her?" I whispered. Kate didn't look up from her tea. "Tell her what exactly? That I found someone who treats me like a human being? That I'm going to a party with a man who makes me laugh? Your mother loves your grandfather, but she doesn't live with him. She doesn't see the man who calls me names when the sun goes down. She sees the father she used to have. If I tell her, she'll see me as a villain. I'm not ready to be the villain in her eyes." "But at the gala," I argued, "people are going to see you. Mike isn't exactly subtle, Kate. And you're glowing. People aren't stupid." She finally looked at me, and for a second, the grandmother mask slipped. I saw the sharp, iron-willed woman who had built a successful business from nothing. "Let them look," she said firmly. "I've spent a decade being invisible. If they want to look, let them see that I'm still here." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a fling. This was a revolution. But the professional side of me was screaming. Mike wasn't just some guy she met on an app. He was a client I had passed to her. If this went south, if they had a messy breakup, or if other clients saw them and thought our firm lacked professional ethics, it could jeopardize everything we'd built. In our industry, reputation is the only currency that matters. A 78-year-old woman dating a 62-year-old client while her husband is dying of dementia at home? That's the kind of tea that people drink for months. I tried to talk to Mark about it again that night, but he was done hearing about it. "She's an adult," he said, throwing his keys on the dresser. "She knows the risks. But I'm telling you now, I'm not going to lie for her. If someone asks me who that guy is, I'm not saying he's a cousin or a business associate. I'm staying out of it." The tension in our own house was rising because of it. It felt like Kate's secret was a poisonous gas, slowly leaking into everyone else's lives. Friday night, the evening before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather. I remembered him from when I was a little girl. He wasn't always an asshole. He used to take me for ice cream and tell me stories about the Navy. He used to look at Kate like she was the only woman in the world. I wondered if, somewhere deep inside that shrunken, malfunctioning brain, there was a part of him that knew. I wondered if he could feel the shift in the house. The way the air changed when Kate walked into the room smelling of a new expensive perfume instead of the usual scent of lavender and antiseptic. I felt a wave of profound sadness for him. He was losing his life twice, once to the disease, and now he was losing the woman who was supposed to be his anchor. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me in August. I remembered him calling me a worthless little girl because I'd accidentally brought him the wrong flavor of yogurt. I remembered the bruise on Kate's arm from when he'd gripped her too hard in a moment of confusion and rage. The moral grey area was so big, you could park a fleet of SUVs in it. Saturday morning arrived with a bright, mocking sun. I spent the morning at the salon getting my hair done, but I couldn't relax. Every time the door opened, I expected to see a reporter from a tabloid or my mother screaming that she'd found out the truth. My phone rang. It was Kate. "He just sent me flowers," she chirped. "Red roses, a dozen of them. They're beautiful, honey. I've hidden them in the laundry room so your mother won't see them when she comes over." "The laundry room?" I asked, a bit of the absurdity finally getting to me. "You're hiding roses in the laundry room? Like a teenager hiding a pack of cigarettes?" "It's romantic," she laughed. "It's exciting. I'll see you at the venue at 7. Don't be late. I want us to make an entrance." I hung up, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. Making an entrance was exactly what I was afraid of. By 6 p.m., Mark and I were dressed. He looked handsome in his tux, but his face was set in a grim mask. I was wearing a black dress that felt like funeral attire, even though it was meant for a celebration. We drove to the venue in a silence that was punctuated only by the GPS directions. As we pulled up to the valet, I saw a sleek black town car idling near the entrance. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, and had that kind of silver fox energy that made him look like a retired architect or a high-end consultant. That was Mike. He turned and reached a hand back into the car. And then Kate stepped out. I gasped. I couldn't help it. She looked incredible. The navy blue gown hugged her in all the right places. Her hair was an elegant silver crown, and she was wearing diamonds that caught the light of the valet lamps. But it wasn't the clothes. It was her face. She looked 20 years younger. She was beaming at Mike, and he was looking at her with an intensity that made me blush. They weren't just attending a gala. They were announcing themselves to the world. Mark leaned over the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield. "Oh boy," he muttered. "Here we go. The bomb is about to drop." We got out of the car, and as we walked toward the entrance, Kate spotted us. She waved, her face lighting up even more. She grabbed Mike's arm. Not a polite, professional touch, but a possessive, intimate cling, and started walking toward us. "Ready or not?" I whispered to Mark. "I'm definitely not," he replied. As we reached them, the air felt electric. I could see other guests, people we'd known for years, colleagues, rivals, slowing down, their eyes darting from Kate to the man on her arm and back again. The whispers hadn't started yet, but you could feel them gathering in the back of everyone's throats. Kate reached me and pulled me into a hug. She smelled like expensive jasmine. "You look beautiful, darling," she whispered in my ear. Then she pulled back and gestured to the man beside her. "This is Mike," she said, her voice loud and clear for anyone within earshot. "He is my date for the evening." Mike stepped forward, extending a hand to Mark. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the family Kate talks so much about," he said. His voice was smooth, confident, and completely devoid of any shame. I looked at Mark. Mark looked at Mike. I looked at the entrance to the ballroom where 300 people were waiting to see the most respected woman in our industry walk in with a man who wasn't her husband. And that's when I saw her. Standing just inside the glass doors, talking to the event coordinator, was a woman in a floral dress. She turned around just as we started to move toward the door. It was my mother. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be at home, watching my grandpa. My heart stopped. Kate froze beside me, her hand tightening on Mike's arm. My mother's eyes traveled from me to Mark to the glamorous woman in the navy dress, and then they settled on Mike. The look of pure, unadulterated confusion on her face slowly began to melt into something else, something much more dangerous. The world stopped. In that split second, the glittering chandelier above us, the low hum of the jazz band in the ballroom, and the chatter of hundreds of people in formal wear all faded into a dull, static buzz. All I could see was my mother's face. She was standing there in a simple floral dress, a stark contrast to the sea of black ties and silk gowns. She looked like she just stepped out of a different reality and collided head on with ours. Her eyes moved slowly, almost mechanically. They went from my face, wide-eyed and panicked, to Mark's, who looked like he wanted to phase through the floor, and finally settled on Mike's hand, which was still firmly tucked under Kate's elbow. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody said a word. It was the kind of silence that feels like a physical weight pressing down on your chest until you can't draw a full breath. Mom? I finally managed to choke out. My voice sounded thin and high, like a child caught doing something wrong. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be with Grandpa. My mother didn't answer me. She didn't even look at me. Her gaze was locked on Kate. I called Mrs. Higgins from next door, she said, her voice eerily calm, the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. She said she could sit with him for a few hours. I wanted to surprise you, Kate. I thought you deserved to have your daughter here to celebrate your achievements. I wanted to see you walk into this room and get the recognition you worked so hard for. She paused, her eyes flickering to Mike. But it looks like you already have plenty of support. Kate didn't crumble. I expected her to, but she didn't. She stood her ground, her chin tilted up, though I could see the slight tremor in her hands. Jane, she said, using my mother's name instead of honey or dear. I didn't expect you. Clearly, my mother replied. She stepped closer, ignoring the people walking past us into the ballroom. Who is this, Kate? Mike, to his credit, or perhaps his stupidity, stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm Mike, a friend of Kate's, and a client. The word client hung in the air like a dirty secret. My mother didn't take his hand. She didn't even acknowledge it. She just kept her eyes on her mother. A client, my mother repeated. You uninvited my father, your husband of 50 years, so you could bring a client as your date to a black tie gala? A man you're holding onto like a life raft? It's not like that, Jane, Kate said, her voice gaining strength. You don't understand what my life is like every single day. You visit for an hour, you help out when you can, but you don't live in that house. You don't live with the ghost of a man who spends his days insulting the woman who cleans up after him. He has a disease, my mother hissed, her voice finally cracking. He is sick, Mom. He's not doing it on purpose. He's the man who raised me. He's the man who loved you for half a century. And you're out here, in this dress, with this man. while he's sitting in his chair wondering where his wife is? At this point, people were starting to stare. I could see our competitors, the Millers, lingering near the coat check, their ears practically vibrating with interest. This was exactly what I had feared. The private tragedy of our family was becoming a public spectacle. Mark stepped in then, his hand on my mother's shoulder. Jane, let's take this outside, or to the lounge. We shouldn't do this here. I'm not going anywhere, my mother said, shaking him off. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Did you know about this? Did you know she was bringing him? I felt like the floor was falling away. This was the moment I dreaded. If I lied, I was betraying my mother. If I told the truth, I was betraying Kate. I looked at Kate, and for the first time that night, I saw fear in her eyes. She was pleading with me, silently, not to destroy the one night of happiness she'd clawed out for herself. I knew he was coming, Mom, I said softly. But it's complicated. Kate has been through so much. Complicated? My mother interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping her. There's nothing complicated about adultery, honey. There's nothing complicated about abandoning your husband when he's at his most vulnerable. I haven't abandoned him, Kate snapped, her voice echoing off the marble walls. I am there every morning. I am there every night. I am there when he's screaming and when he's crying and when he's throwing things at me. I give him everything I have left. Is it so much to ask for one night where I can feel like a woman instead of a servant? One night where someone looks at me and sees something other than a nurse? Mike stepped in then, putting a protective arm around Kate's waist. Look, maybe we should all just calm down. Do not touch her in front of me, my mother said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. And do not talk to me. You are a predator. You're taking advantage of an exhausted woman who doesn't know which way is up. I'm 62, Jane, not 12, Mike said, his own temper starting to flare. And Kate is a grown woman. She made her own choices. Maybe if you helped her more, she wouldn't feel the need to look for comfort elsewhere. That was the match in the powder keg. My mother looked like she was about to strike him, and Mark quickly moved between them. Enough! I yelled. It wasn't a loud yell, but it was sharp enough to cut through the tension. Everyone, stop! Mom, please! We are at a work event. Kate, Mike, just go inside. Go to your table. Mom, come with me. We're going to talk. For a second, nobody moved. We were a frozen tableau of family dysfunction. Then, Kate took a deep breath, adjusted her wrap, and looked at Mike. Let's go, she said, her voice trembling but firm. They walked past us, Mike's hand firmly on the small of her back. They walked into that ballroom like they were royalty, even as the whispers started to ripple through the crowd behind them. My mother watched them go, her face pale. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the revelation had physically shrunk her. I led her over to a small, secluded seating area near the elevators, Mark trailing behind us like a bodyguard. How long? My mother asked, as she sank into a velvet chair. Few months, I admitted, sitting across from her. It's been mostly talking, Mom. Flirting. They meet for lunch. She didn't want to hurt you. She's lonely. She's so incredibly lonely. We're all lonely, my mother cried. I lost my father years ago to this disease. I grieve him every single day. But I don't go out and find a replacement while he's still breathing. It's a matter of honor. It's a matter of love. Is it love to stay in a house where you're being emotionally abused every day? I asked, my own frustration boiling over. I stayed there for a month, Mom. Remember? I had to go back to therapy because of how he treated me. And that was just 30 days. Kate has been doing it for 10 years. 10 years of asshole grandpa. 10 years of a man who doesn't even like her anymore, let alone love her. That's not him talking, my mother argued. That's the dementia. Does it matter? I countered. The bruises on her arm are real. The depression is real. The way she was fading away right in front of us was real. Since she met Mike, she's been alive again. Can't you see that? My mother looked toward the ballroom doors. At what cost? Her reputation? Our family's dignity? She's a 78-year-old woman, honey. What does she think is going to happen here? Is she going to run off with this guy? Is she going to leave dad in a home and go live in a condo in Florida? The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have the answer. I didn't know what Kate's endgame was. I didn't think she knew either. She was just a woman who had been underwater for a decade, and she had finally found a pocket of air. She wasn't thinking about the shore. She was just breathing. Mark said she should put him in a home, I said quietly, glancing at my husband. Mark nodded. If she's moving on, she needs to be honest about it. She can't be the devoted wife at 9 a.m. and the girlfriend at 9 p.m. It's a conflict of interest, Jane. Not just morally, but for her own sanity. She's trying to live two lives, and they're diametrically opposed. My mother stayed silent for a long time, watching the elevator doors open and close. Finally, she stood up. She smoothed out her floral dress, her face setting into a mask of cold determination. I'm going home, she said. I'm going to relieve Mrs. Higgins, and tomorrow your grandmother and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Mom, don't do anything rash, I pleaded. She looked at me, and for the first time, there was a distance in her eyes that scared me. I'm not the one being rash, honey. I'm the one trying to remember who we are. Tell Kate. Tell her I hope the steak was worth it. She turned and walked toward the valley, her head held high. I stood there, watching her go, feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. I looked at Mark. What do we do now? Do we go in there? Mark looked at the ballroom where the music was swelling into a crescendo. We have to. We are part of this business too. We have to go in there, sit at that table, and pretend like our family isn't imploding in the lobby. I took a deep breath, adjusted my dress, and took his arm. We walked through those doors, and the heat and noise of the gala hit me like a physical blow. I scanned the room and found our table. There was Kate, sitting under the spotlight, laughing at something Mike had said. She was holding a glass of champagne, her diamonds glittering under the lights. She looked like the belle of the ball. But as I got closer, I saw her eyes. She was scanning the room, looking for my mother. When she saw me walk in with Mark and without her daughter, her smile didn't falter, but her hand tightened around the stem of her glass so hard I thought it might shatter. The night was just beginning, and I had the sinking feeling that the "I'm gonna get laid" comment was going to be the least of our problems before the sun came up. The walk from the lobby to our table felt like the longest journey of my life. Every click of my heels on the polished marble floor sounded like a countdown. Mark's arm was stiff under my hand, a silent protest against the role we were about to play. We were the support act for a scandal in the making, and I could feel the eyes of the room sliding over us, then immediately jumping to the head of the table where Kate and Mike sat. The two employees Kate had confided in earlier, Sarah and David, were already there. They looked like they wanted to crawl under the tablecloth. They were staring intently at their salad forks, occasionally casting darting glances at Mike, who was leaning back in his chair, looking entirely too comfortable. He was nursing a scotch, his other hand resting casually on the back of Kate's chair. To anyone who didn't know the situation, they looked like a sophisticated, wealthy couple celebrating a lifetime of success. To those of us who knew the truth, they looked like a crime scene. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding fake even to my own ears as we took our seats. Kate looked up, her smile bright and brittle. "There you are! Where's your mother? I thought she was right behind you." The table went silent. Sarah and David looked up, their eyes wide. I looked at Kate, seeing the silent plea in her expression. She wanted me to lie. She wanted me to say Mom had a headache or an emergency at home. Anything to maintain the illusion for just a few more hours. "She went home, Kate," I said flatly. "She's going back to check on Grandpa." The name Grandpa hit the table like a lead weight. Mike didn't flinch, but Kate's smile finally faltered. She took a long, slow sip of her champagne, her eyes fixed on some point across the room. "I see," she whispered. "So, Mike," Mark said, his voice dripping with a forced politeness that felt like a threat. "Kate tells me you're a client. What exactly is it that you do?" It was a trap, and we all knew it. Mark wanted to remind everyone, especially Mike, that this started as a professional relationship. He wanted to highlight the boundary that had been trampled. Mike didn't miss a beat. He launched into a polished explanation of his real estate development firm, his voice smooth and authoritative. He was charming. There was no denying that. He talked about his recent projects with an energy that was infectious. He was the new and exciting thing in Kate's life, a stark contrast to the stagnant, decaying world she inhabited at home. As he spoke, I watched Kate. She was looking at him with an expression that was almost primal. It wasn't just attraction, it was hunger. She was devouring the attention, the vitality, the sheer normalcy of having a man talk to her about something other than medication schedules or lost keys. But the bubble didn't stay intact for long. About halfway through the main course, Mr. Henderson, one of the most influential figures in our industry and a longtime friend of my grandparents, made his way over to our table. He was a man of the old guard, dignified, traditional, and someone whose respect Kate had spent 40 years earning. "Kate, my dear," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "You look absolutely radiant tonight. I haven't seen you this lively in years." "Thank you, Arthur," Kate said, her voice steady. "It's a wonderful evening." Arthur's eyes drifted to Mike. There was a pause, a heartbeat too long as he took in the unfamiliar man sitting in the seat where my grandfather should have been. "And who is your companion? I don't believe we've met." I held my breath. This was the moment. Kate could claim he was a business partner. She could say he was an old family friend. She could pivot and protect her reputation. Instead, she straightened her back. "Arthur, this is Mike. He's a close friend of mine. Mike, this is Arthur Henderson." Arthur's eyebrows twitched. He wasn't a fool. He knew my grandfather was ill, but he also knew what close friend meant in this context at a black tie event. He looked at Mike's hand, which was now resting on the table near Kate's, their fingers almost touching. "A friend," Arthur repeated, his voice cooling by several degrees. "I see. Well, it's a pleasure, Mike. Kate, give my best to your husband. We've all been praying for him." He didn't linger. He gave a polite, tight nod to the rest of us and walked away. The silence he left behind was deafening. "That was awkward," David whispered into his wine glass. "It was honest," Kate snapped. She turned to Mike, her eyes flashing. "I'm tired of hiding in parking lots, Mike. If they're going to talk, let them talk." "I'm with you, Kate," Mike said, covering her hand with his. "You know that." I felt a wave of nausea. I looked at Mark, who was staring at his steak like he wanted to stab it. I thought about my mother, sitting in that quiet house with my grandfather, listening to him mumble in his sleep, her heart breaking for the betrayal she'd just witnessed. I thought about that month in August, the cruelty, the darkness, the way my grandfather had made me feel like I was nothing. I found myself caught in a terrible tug of war. I hated what Kate was doing to my mother and the memory of my grandfather. But I also remembered the look on Kate's face when she'd been caring for him for months on end without a break. The grayness of her skin, the way her hands shook, the way she seemed to be vanishing. Which was worse, a slow death by duty or a messy, scandalous rebirth? The dinner continued, but the atmosphere at our table was toxic. Mike was trying to be one of the guys with Mark and David, making jokes that landed with a thud. He started talking about a trip he wanted to take Kate on, a cruise through the Mediterranean. "We've been looking at the itineraries," Mike said, beaming at her. 10 days. No phones, no business, just the sea. "And what about Grandpa?" I blurted out. I couldn't help it. The words just tumbled out of my mouth. "Who's going to take care of him for 10 days, Kate? Mom? Me? A nursing home?" The table went dead silent again. Kate's face paled, then turned a deep angry red. "We haven't worked out the details yet, honey," she said, her voice trembling. "Details?" I challenged. "He can't feed himself, Kate. He doesn't know what year it is. You can't just work out the details for 10 days of 24-hour care so you can go on a cruise with a client." "I deserve a life," Kate hissed, leaning across the table. Her voice was low, but it had the sharpness of a razor blade. "I have given him 50 years. 50 years of my life. I have changed his clothes. I have taken his insults. I have watched him turn into a monster. When is it my turn? Do I have to wait until he's in the ground to have 10 days of peace?" The emotion in her voice was raw and ugly. It wasn't the grandma I knew. It was a woman who was screaming from the bottom of a well. "Kate," Mike said softly, trying to soothe her. "No," she said, pulling her hand away from him. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears of rage. "You don't get to judge me. Not after 1 month of helping. You got to leave. You got to go back to your husband and your nice, quiet life. I don't get to leave. The only way I leave is in a casket or a scandal. And I'm choosing the scandal." She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "I need some air." She walked away, her navy blue gown trailing behind her like a royal shroud. Mike stood up to follow her, giving us a look that was half apologetic and half defiant. Mark let out a long, slow breath. "Well," he said, looking at me, "I think that officially settles the 'is she going to get late' question. She's not just looking for a fling. She's looking for an exit." I watched them disappear into the crowd. I felt a profound sense of loss. Our family, as I knew it, was over. The business, our reputation, our history, it was all being burned down in the name of a 62-year-old man and a Mediterranean cruise. But as I sat there, surrounded by the glitter and the music, I couldn't help but remember the way she had whispered those 4 words in the driveway. "I'm gonna get laid." It wasn't just about sex. It was about proving she was still alive. And as much as it hurt, as much as I hated the way she was doing it, I realized that for Kate, the alternative wasn't staying. It was dying. I looked at my phone. A text from my mother. "He's awake. He's asking for her. What do I tell him? I looked at the empty chairs where Kate and Mike had been sitting. I looked at the champagne glass with Kate's lipstick on the rim. Tell him she's at work, I typed back. Tell him she's working on a big project. It wasn't even a lie. She was working on the biggest project of her life, her own survival. But I knew deep down that the cost of that project was going to be more than any of us could afford to pay. The car ride home from the gala was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Mark didn't say a word, but the way he gripped the steering wheel told me everything I needed to know. The glitz, the champagne, the expensive navy blue gown. It all felt like a fever dream that had turned into a nightmare. We had left Kate and Mike at the venue. They were staying for the late night dancing. Or maybe they'd already slipped away to whatever hotel room Mike had undoubtedly booked. When we pulled into my grandparents' driveway, the porch light was on. It felt like a spotlight on our family's shame. I saw my mother's car parked crookedly near the garage. I knew she was inside, sitting in the silence of the house, waiting. You don't have to come in, I told Mark, my voice barely a whisper. I'm coming in, he said firmly. Someone has to be the adult here. We walked into the house and the smell hit me immediately. That familiar, suffocating mix of lavender-scented cleaning supplies and the underlying metallic tang of old age and illness. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting long, jagged shadows across the room. She looked like she hadn't moved since she'd left the gala. How was the rest of the party? She asked, her voice hollow. It was a disaster, Mom, I said, sitting across from her. Everyone saw. Everyone's talking. Mr. Henderson was there. He saw them. My mother closed her eyes for a moment, her breath shuddering. He asked for her 3 times. He woke up confused, yelling that there was a stranger in the house. I had to show him my ID, his own daughter, to prove I belonged there. And all he wanted was Kate. He kept saying, "Where's my girl? Where's my Kate?" The guilt hit me like a physical punch. I thought of my grandmother, probably laughing in the arms of a man 16 years younger, while the man she'd spent half a century with was calling out for her in the dark. She's not coming back tonight, is she? My mother asked. I don't think so, I replied. We sat there in the quiet for what felt like hours. Mark made a pot of coffee, the mundane sound of the machine the only thing keeping us grounded. And then, around 2 a.m., the sound of a car door muffled by the heavy front door echoed through the house. A moment later, Kate walked in. She was still in the navy gown, but she'd taken her hair down. She looked disheveled, her makeup slightly smudged, but there was a defiance in her eyes that I'd never seen before. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like a woman who had just come back from a battlefield and won. She saw the 3 of us sitting in the kitchen and stopped. She didn't apologize. She didn't look ashamed. She just walked to the counter, poured herself a glass of water, and took a slow, deliberate sip. He's asleep, my mother said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. In case you were wondering. I know his schedule, Jane, Kate said calmly. I've lived it for 10 years. You were with him, weren't you? My mother stood up, her chair screeching against the tile. That man, Mike! You stayed with him while your husband was here, losing his mind, calling your name. Kate set the glass down with a sharp clack. Yes, I was with him. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't the nurse. I wasn't the wife of the man with dementia. I was a person. I was Kate. Do you have any idea how it feels to be looked at with desire instead of pity? It's adultery, Mom, my mother screamed. There is no other word for it. You are cheating on a man who can't even defend himself. He's been gone for 5 years, Jane. Kate's voice finally broke, rising to meet my mother's. That man in the bedroom? That's not my husband. My husband would have hated this. My husband would have told me to go live my life. He would have been the first person to tell me to put him in a home and find someone to make me smile again. The man in there now is a stranger who looks like him and shares his name, but he is a cruel, empty shell. The words hung in the air, brutal and honest. Mark cleared his throat, stepping forward. Kate, we're not trying to say you haven't suffered, but the way you're doing this, it's destroying the family. It's destroying the business. You're a public figure in this town. Then let the town find someone else to gossip about, Kate snapped. She turned to me, her eyes softening just a fraction. You said you wanted me to be happy. Was that a lie? Was that just something you said because it sounded good? I do want you to be happy, I said, my voice thick with tears. But I don't want you to lose your soul in the process. Mike is a client, Kate. He's 62. He's at a different stage of life. What happens when the newness wears off? What happens when you've alienated your daughter and your granddaughter for a man you've known for 3 months? I'd rather have 3 months of feeling alive than another 10 years of waiting to die, Kate said firmly. My mother looked at her, a look of profound disappointment crossing her face. I can't be here. I can't watch you do this. If you're going to keep seeing him, if you're going to bring him into our lives like this, then you're on your own. I'm not coming over to babysit so you can go on dates. I'm not helping you cover up your tracks. Fine, Kate said, her voice cold as ice. Then don't. I'll hire a full-time nurse. I'll use the money I've earned from 40 years of hard work. I've spent my whole life taking care of everyone else. I'm done asking for permission. My mother walked out of the kitchen, grabbed her keys, and left without another word. The sound of her car speeding away felt like the final cord being cut. For a long moment, it was just me, Mark, and Kate in that dim kitchen. The silence was heavy with the things we couldn't say. Kate looked exhausted now, the adrenaline of the night finally fading. She looked her age again. Is he really going to take you on a cruise? I asked quietly. Kate nodded, a small sad smile playing on her lips. He wants to see the world with me. He says I've been a prisoner for too long. And what happens to the business? I asked. Our clients saw you tonight, Kate. We have meetings on Monday. People are going to ask questions. They're going to talk about professional boundaries. Let them ask, Kate said, heading toward the hallway. I'll tell them the truth. I'm 78 years old, and I finally decided to stop apologizing for existing. She disappeared into her bedroom, the door closing with a soft thud. Mark and I walked out to our car in the cool pre-dawn air. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. What now? I asked as we drove away. Now, Mark said, we wait for the fallout, because this isn't over. Your mom isn't going to let this go. The industry isn't going to let this go. And your grandpa, he's still in that house. Over the next few weeks, the scandal became the talk of the town. Clients called with concerns about the leadership of our firm. My mother stopped speaking to Kate entirely. And Mike? Mike became a permanent fixture. He was there every day, his SUV parked in the driveway, a blatant symbol of the new regime. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't the gossip or the business meetings. It was the moments when I'd go over to the house and see my grandpa. He seemed to sense the tension, even if he couldn't put words to it. He became more agitated, more prone to outbursts. He'd look at Mike with a confusion that would quickly turn to rage, and Kate would just walk away, her face a mask of indifference. She was getting what she wanted. She was getting laid. She was going to fancy dinners. She was planning her cruise. But every time I looked at her, I wondered if she realized the price she was paying. She was trading a lifetime of respect and family harmony for a few months of passion. Was she a villain? Or was she a victim of a cruel disease that had pushed her to the edge of her sanity? I still don't know the answer. All I know is that our family is broken, and I'm the one standing in the middle of the debris, trying to figure out if there's anything worth saving. The weeks following the gala were some of the quietest and most uncomfortable of my entire life. It was like a thick, invisible fog had settled over our family, and no matter how much we tried to fan it away, it just clung to everything. The business, our pride and joy, the thing Kate and I had built together, felt different. Clients would call, and I'd hear the hesitation in their voices. They weren't just asking about the latest project anymore. They were fishing. They wanted to know if the rumors were true. They wanted to know if the legendary Kate had finally lost her mind. But Kate didn't care. She was a woman on a mission, and that mission was the Mediterranean. 3 weeks after the gala, the town car pulled up into the driveway again. This time, there were suitcases. Mike was there, looking every bit the excited vacationer in a linen shirt and expensive sunglasses. He helped Kate load her bags into the trunk. Bags filled with those new clothes, the strappy shoes, and the silk dresses. I stood on the porch watching them. My mother refused to even come over to say goodbye. She had made her stance clear. If Kate was leaving, she was leaving on her own. I was the one left to coordinate with the full-time nursing agency we'd hired to cover the 10 days Kate would be gone. It was an exorbitant expense, one that Kate paid for without blinking. "I'll check my email when we're in port," Kate said, leaning over to give me a quick, distracted kiss on the cheek. She smelled like sunblock and expensive perfume. "Take care of things at the office, honey. You're the boss while I'm gone." "And Grandpa?" I asked, my voice flat. She paused, her hand on the car door. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the old Kate, the one who would have stayed up all night worrying. But then she looked at Mike, who was waiting with an open door and a smile, and the mask slid back into place. "The nurses have the number for the doctor," she said, "and they have your number. He'll be fine. He won't even know I'm gone." She got in the car and they drove away. Those 10 days were a nightmare. Despite the professional nurses, the house felt haunted. My grandfather was more confused than ever. He would wander into the kitchen at 3 a.m. looking for Kate, calling her name with a desperation that broke my heart. When the nurses tried to comfort him, he'd lash out. His dementia-fueled rage turned up to a terrifying volume. I spent most of those nights on the sofa in the living room, unable to sleep, listening to the man who used to be my hero slowly unravel in the other room. My mother came over once. She walked into the house, saw the nurse feeding my grandfather a bowl of mushy cereal, and burst into tears. She didn't stay long. "This isn't a home anymore," she whispered as she left. "It's a waiting room." When Kate returned, she was tan, rested, and more defiant than ever. She showed me pictures of her and Mike in Santorini, at dinner in Rome, laughing on the deck of a massive ship. She looked younger than I'd seen her in 20 years. But when she walked into the bedroom to see my grandfather, The reality of her life came crashing back. He didn't recognize her, not at first. He looked at her tan skin and her new jewelry and asked who the pretty lady was. Then, a few minutes later, the switch flipped. He realized who she was, and the insults started. He called her every name in the book. He accused her of stealing his money, of being a loose woman, of trying to kill him. The vacation glow vanished in an instant. Kate stood there, taking the verbal abuse, and I saw her shoulders slump. The new life she tried to build with Mike was a beautiful dream, but the nightmare of a reality wasn't going anywhere. A week after she got back, the breaking point finally arrived. My grandfather had a fall. It wasn't major, but it was enough to land him in the hospital for observation. Mike wanted to come to the hospital with Kate, but for the first time, she told him no. She spent 3 nights in a hard plastic chair next to my grandfather's bed, listening to the beep of the monitors and his ragged breathing. When he was discharged, the doctor pulled us into a small office. "He needs more care than you can provide at home," the doctor said plainly. "The aggression is worsening and his physical safety is at risk. It's time to consider a specialized facility." Kate looked at me, then at my mother, who had finally shown up to help. The room was silent. "I can't do it anymore," Kate whispered. It was the first time she'd admitted it out loud. "I thought I could have both. I thought I could keep him here and still have a life for myself. But I'm failing everyone. I'm failing him, I'm failing my daughter, and I'm failing myself." The decision was made. Within 2 weeks, my grandfather was moved into a high-end memory care facility about 20 minutes away. Kate made sure he had the best room, the best view, and the most attentive staff. She visited him every single morning. She'd sit with him, hold his hand while he yelled at her, and then she'd leave and go to work. But things didn't go back to normal. The affair with Mike continued, but the spark seemed different now that the secrecy was gone. Now that there was no sneaking around, it was just a relationship between a 78-year-old woman and a 62-year-old man. The reality of the age gap, the different stages of life, and the shadow of my grandfather started to weigh on them. Mike wanted her to move into a new condo with him. He wanted her to retire, to sell the business, to travel full-time. But Kate wasn't ready to let go of the life she'd built. She realized that while she loved the way Mike made her feel, she wasn't sure she loved him. She had used him as a fire escape to get out of a burning building. Now that she was out, she wasn't sure where she wanted to go. As for our business, we're still standing. We lost a few clients who didn't like the drama, but most stayed. They stayed because Kate is still the best in the business, and because eventually the gossip shifted to someone else. The relationship between my mother and grandmother is chilly. They're polite now. They see each other at Sunday dinner, but the deep, unconditional trust they once had is gone. My mother can't forget the gala, and Kate can't forget the way her daughter judged her when she was at her lowest point. I'm still in the middle. I'm the partner, the granddaughter, and the peacemaker. I go to the memory care unit twice a week to see my grandpa. Sometimes he knows me, and he'll tell me a story about the Navy. Those are the good days. Most days, he just stares at the TV, and I sit there in silence, wondering if he knows how much our world changed while he was fading away. I look at Kate sometimes when she's at her desk, and I see the complexity of it all. She made a choice that most people would call wrong. She cheated on a dying man. She lied to her family. She risked her reputation. But I also see a woman who can breathe again. I see a woman who isn't crying in the laundry room anymore. It's a story with no heroes and no clear villains. Just people trying to survive the wreckage of a life they didn't ask for. It's easy to judge from the outside, but when you're the one living in the antiseptic smelling silence, the lines between right and wrong start to get very, very blurry. So, I have to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have stayed by your spouse's side until the very last breath, no matter how much they hurt you? Or do you think Kate was right to find a little bit of joy while she still could? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious if anyone else has dealt with this kind of impossible situation. And if you want to hear more stories about the complicated, messy reality of family and life, don't forget to subscribe. As for me, I'm just taking it one day at a time, trying to remember the man my grandpa was, and trying to love the woman my grandmother has become. Because in the end, that's all we can really do.